There, Mr. Angus, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister Blair. Thank you, Minister Lucky. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to say two things at the outset. Mr. Blair, you, like me, you're a talker, so I'm going to have to ask you to keep them a little shorter because I only have 6 minutes here and I don't want to be rude. And secondly, I want to acknowledge the late Wayne Russet of the RCMP, who I had the honor of negotiating some very tense standoffs with when I worked with the Indigenous communities. And Wayne understood policing as a social engagement, about de-escalation, about building trust. And we are here to ensure that all officers in all departments understand that that role of the police officer is someone that can actually take on a very difficult, intense situation and de-escalate it is vital. So with that in mind, you know, I was interested in your comments. You said that systemic racism was deficiencies in the system that brings different outcomes to different people. To me, the deficiencies in the system is that 4.9% of Canadians are Indigenous, and yet they represent nearly 40% of the fatalities in the RCMP. The different outcomes is like life and death. These are numbers that are staggering. And Minister, you talked about young black men being disproportionately involved in the system. You know, when you were chief of police, carding was one of your very strong tools. You were very strong about it in the city of Toronto, and it was heavily used. Given what you know now, my colleague Matthew Green had said, would you consider apologizing to say that that was a mistake using those tactics? What do you say about the use of carding that happened on your watch?
I would clarify for you and Mr. Green actually what the policy was in Toronto. We worked very hard on reducing gun violence in the city and worked I've worked in racialized communities most of my adult life, and I know the importance of treating everyone with respect and with dignity and within the law. I strongly advocated for working within those communities and never supported the indiscriminate or arbitrary stopping of individuals that was based on anything but evidence and the law. And those were the rules, and we upheld those rules. I think that the disparate outcomes were something that we were aware of. And I can cite countless examples of working within those racialized communities and training programs for the police to reduce it. And Mr. Angus, I said then, and I say now, racial profiling and any action of the police which is based on bias is not only unacceptable and abhorrent, but it's contrary to law. It's contrary to the Human Rights Act and Section 15, and it's contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is the highest law of the country. That was what was pointed out about carding,
the arbitrary stopping of young black men. So again, if we look at the numbers and what they tell us, 8.8% of Toronto's population is black, yet they made up 30% of physical confrontations with police that resulted in serious injury, 60% of deadly encounters, and 70% of fatal police shootings were young black men, mostly in the city of Toronto. So these are very serious issues. So I'm glad to hear that from you. I want to switch gears a little bit. Being that we understand that the government is not moving forward yet on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls because of COVID, but COVID hasn't stopped the domestic violence and the horrific mistreatment of Indigenous women. I refer you to what's going on in Nunavut, where we've got cases. I believe the Complaints Commission has over 30 cases of women being treated in horrific conditions. It's actually hard to read it out. The strip searches, the humiliating treatment, tying women naked to the chairs. That wouldn't happen to white women anywhere else, but in Nunavut, this seems to be a pattern, and yet we've had no investigation of it. So in light of the promises that were made on the murdered and missing, how is it that we can see such abusive treatment of women who are suffering sexual assault in Nunavut?
Those things shouldn't happen to any woman in Canada. There needs to be investigations and a clear line of accountability, and I'll certainly allow the commissioner to speak on behalf of her service, but I also believe that that's unacceptable to her and to the leadership of the RCMP.
We'll follow up in the next round. I'm very pleased to see you talking about the disparity faced by Indigenous police in what is being treated as a program. In the communities we represent in Treaty 9 with Anishinaabe Police, they do incredible work. We've had a hell of a time getting them radios, getting backup. One officer told me, I've slept in places that you wouldn't let a dog sleep in. Their underfunding has put their ability to serve people at risk. And so when I see the struggle that we have in Anishinaabe territory to get good policing, and then I see, for example, the RCMP has just bought 2 armored vehicles at a time when we're talking about de-escalating and demilitarizing, I have to ask, what kind of priority is that? That, you know, we're buying old gear from Iraq, that the RCMP can afford that, and we can't get backup radios to ensure police protection in isolated communities like Kingfisher Lake or Pakanjikum?
Well, your question, I think, highlights a flaw in the existing system where those Indigenous police services in Ontario that you cite are funded on a funding model where the federal government pays 52% of the salary and costs of policing, and the province pays 48%. That model of program funding has created, you know, I think, very serious deficiencies in those police services. And by the way, I know the men and women who serve in those services and their leadership too. They're really great people, and they're doing their very best under very difficult and challenging circumstances. It's one of the things that motivates my government to go and create that new legislative framework to serve those communities better and to give them the type of well-resourced, appropriately resourced policing services that those communities deserve and need.
Leave it there.